So today's training is on quality of care, and the title of the training is The Bottom Line. So the reason that I'm giving this training is because quality of care is an extremely important part of providing services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And for those who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's really important for you guys to know what you should be expecting from the people who support you and the level of care that you guys are entitled to. So this training is adapted for training specifically for supported employment professionals. So the language may be a little bit different because it's mainly geared towards those people. However, I'd love if you took this and thought about the ways that you should be seeing your support professionals acting towards you. And we're going to have more discussions about that as well. Before I go any farther, I just want to mention that TCS, or Training Consultation Services, is a program that is specific to providing support to people who work in supported employment. So essentially, if you get certain job supports that fall under specific categories, which if you have ever any sort of issues about that or any questions, you can contact me. My contact information is at the end of the slides. I can go ahead and provide support for that. My funding comes from DDD, or the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So any additional questions about those services that they can provide, I can help sort of be a jumping off point for that. So the problem that you may be seeing, and the reason why we have this training in the first place, is that people tend to have what I like to call an energy efficient mode. So essentially what happens is people they think that they can sort of not put in all of the effort that is required all of the time. And this is a natural thing that a lot of people do for a lot of different reasons. It's not just for people who work in supported settings. So let's say you were too tired to cook after a long day of working, and so you decide to order out. That's sort of an energy efficient mode. What you're doing is you're taking a shortcut. Instead of cooking dinner, you're ordering out. And that accomplishes the goal. It does what you need it to do. It comes with a couple of drawbacks, mainly that it could be expensive or that it may not be as healthy as a home-cooked meal, but at least you're getting the job done. So energy efficient mode is really useful and can be helpful in a lot of different scenarios. But when you start seeing energy efficient mode when it comes to direct support, that causes a lot of problems. And the reason for that is because if you have direct support, like you have people who support you at home or at work or anywhere else, you deserve a high level of care no matter what. And it doesn't matter whether the person who's supporting you is tired or has some sort of need that's not being met. That's their responsibility to fulfill. So they still have to provide that high quality of care no matter what. So when we see people taking that energy efficient mode, that causes problems that you shouldn't have to deal with. Are we looking for perfection for the people who are supporting us? I would say no, because technically perfection is unattainable. However, I like to go with this idea called idealistic realism in order to try to get as close to perfection as possible. So in essence, what idealistic realism looks at is putting your ideals, or the things that you're really shooting for, your goals that you're trying to get to, and making those a target, and then getting as close as possible to those targets using realistic strategies. So those realistic strategies are ones that we're going to be discussing today. So we're going to talk about some ways that poor quality of care can look like, and as well as some ways that your support professionals can kind of help combat that. You can suggest it to your support professionals if you're seeing it in them, but that's not really your responsibility. But you can also use these for yourself if you're ever having an issue where these kinds of things overlap. The reason why this training is called The Bottom Line is because of this cute little mnemonic that I made up called Love is Not Enough. And if you take away nothing else from the rest of this training, this is something that I really want to stick with you, is that even if your direct support professionals are, they care about you, they love you even, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're providing good support to you. Good support has very specific qualities to it in order for you to get what you need. So even if you think they care about you, that still doesn't mean that they're entitled to treat you however that doesn't fit within the qualities that you deserve. So definitely keep an eye out on it. We're going to go over some ways that poor quality of care can look so that you know how to be aware of it. So we have some common outlook issues here that you may see in people who are supporting you. So sometimes they may say or think things such as, compared to other coaches, I'm doing great. Or they may say to you, other people don't have it as good as you do, or, I'm providing something that's higher than other people. But in reality, what they should be thinking is, you, the person, deserves the best care no matter what other people are doing. There's no qualifier on it. It doesn't matter what other people are thinking. You deserve a high level of care, so that doesn't really come into play. Another one I see commonly is, they don't pay me enough for this. Sometimes when people are working in direct support, they may have situations that are challenging to them specifically. Just like with any job, you may find things that you're not specifically prepared to deal with. And that's totally fine. Again, that's just part of working. But you all deserve to be treated fairly. So even if they don't feel like they're being properly compensated, you still deserve to have that high level of care. So what I like to tell people to kind of think instead is, the support professional, deserves to be treated fairly, and I should stand up for my needs. But it isn't fair to let that affect this person, or you guys as the clients. It doesn't really matter whether or not they feel properly compensated. They should deal with that off the clock. You guys deserve the good quality of care no matter what. There's also a sentiment that I've seen frequently where people think, no one will care if I just, do X, Y, Z. That's kind of a sign of that energy efficient mode, especially coming into play. But the fact of the matter is that the only reason that no one will care if they just do a little things, if they bend the rules a little bit, is because there's been historically a low quality of care standard for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So if the standards were raised to the point that you guys deserve, people would care. And so what that highlights is that, if you're having that sort of mentality, you're not providing a good quality of care. So if you see any of this in your direct support professionals, or if you're a direct support professional who is attending this webinar, try considering replacing your thoughts with these ones in the pink. And if you see that in your support professionals, talk to them about it, go to their supervisor, make sure that you're getting what you need out of their support. Another thing that they should be doing with you all is maintaining confidentiality. This is very important. What confidentiality means is that they keep your information private. So, for example, they're not going to talk about you, or they should not be talking about you in front of other people they support. So even if they don't use any names, if you can't hear them, or you're not listening, or they think that you're not listening or can't hear you, they still should not be doing this, because your information is private and it deserves to be kept private. Other people don't need to know your business, especially from people who are just trying to chit chat. If they are to do this, it violates HIPAA. If you haven't heard of HIPAA, it's a law that is specifically supposed to protect private information in healthcare settings. So when they're providing direct support, it's technically a healthcare setting, which means that giving out that information violates that law. And it also damages the trust between you guys and your coaches. I mean, that only makes sense. I remember my mom told me something very important when I was starting work. And she told me, if they talk about other people to you, then they're going to talk about you to other people. Someone who gives away that kind of information is simply not the kind of trustworthy person that breeds a trustworthy relationship, So it's very important that they don't do this in order to make sure they're providing those high quality services. If they're doing this, again, make sure you tell someone about it. Another thing that they should be doing is using your time appropriately. So when they are supporting you, there's a couple of things that they should not be doing. So this is specific to supported employment, but it could also be if they're, going to, help you go to the grocery store or something along those lines. They shouldn't be using the business as a customer if they're supporting you. There are sometimes a couple of a couple of exceptions to this rule, but this is just a general sort of blanket. Their focus should be on you guys and not the business and getting their own, let's say, personal shopping done, or other things that they need to do. They also shouldn't be using their phone for non-emergencies. So things like scrolling through Instagram, not appropriate here because they're supposed to be focusing on you. And they shouldn't be late or call out whenever possible. Obviously, things happen. You can't always make it on time every single time, but it shouldn't become a habit. It should be something that is done most of the time, whenever possible. If they're frequently showing up late or frequently calling out, please tell someone so that you can get that issue corrected. If they were to do this, depending on what services it is, it may be fraud or abuse for, this is an example, is Medicaid, meaning that they're saying that they're doing something, but really they're not doing it. So getting paid for what they're not actually doing is what's considered fraud or abuse in that sort of financial perspective. And it also takes away the help that you could use. Because the real important thing here is that their services exist because you need them. And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly acceptable. But that means that they should respect that as well. They don't get to just trample on your time. You have the right to that time. In certain ways, you're paying for that time and you're paying for their services. So you should be able to get those high quality services. And someone who doesn't understand that really needs to have a discussion so that they can correct that, or you can find another way to get those services that you need. Another thing that's important is making sure that all communication is appropriate. So sometimes when people are working in direct support, they think that they can be a little bit more casual than they really should be, because naturally when you spend a lot of time with people and around people, and you do that quite frequently, what ends up happening is you form relationships with people. And sometimes that makes it feel like you can become friends with people or you can have more casual relationships, when in reality, that's just not the case. Someone who is a support worker to you is supposed to be doing a job. They're not necessarily supposed to be treating you like a friend. They can support you how you need, but their focus shouldn't be on acting the way that they should with their friends. So making sure that they're communicating appropriately is very important. If they're not appropriately communicating, please tell someone so that you can kind of get this corrected. So here are some things that they should not be doing and some replacements that they should be doing instead. One is that they should not be swearing around you. If they're swearing around you, it's a problem. And specifically, if they're swearing at you, that's something called verbal abuse, which is a huge issue and is never something that you should have to deal with. That's a way of hurting someone, whether or not they mean to. You should never have to deal with that. That isn't as common as swearing around the person. Essentially, though, swearing around the person, not at the person, is just unprofessional behavior and not something that someone who's working should be doing. So what they should be doing is speaking professionally and refraining from that kind of language. Another thing is they should not be mocking or making fun of you. If you feel hurt or offended by any of the things that they're saying or doing, you should tell someone, whether it's them directly or someone else that you trust or someone else, maybe their supervisor or something like that, because you deserve to feel comfortable when you're getting that support. So mocking or being made fun of or feeling like you're being mocked or made fun of is never okay. Instead, they should be considerate of your feelings and making sure that they're not making jokes that are inappropriate. And I'll discuss that in a second as well. They should not be patronizing you. So patronizing is specifically talking about talking down to someone or acting as if they're like smaller, younger, or less capable than the person who's speaking. They should not be doing that to you. You are an equal, just like them. And even if you're getting some support from them, they should not be talking to you as if you're a child or any other way that makes you feel demeaned or hurt inside. Instead, they should be presuming competence. So they shouldn't be telling you that, you can't do something or acting like you can't do something. They should let you give it a shot. Part of the reason that we call it support is because you're the one doing it. The support professionals are just sort of helping you get there and filling in those gaps. So if you want to do something and they're making you feel like you can't or something along those lines, tell someone so that we can get that corrected as well, because that's what we would call poor quality of care. Here we go back to the humor aspect. So they shouldn't be making any kind of jokes in poor taste. So anything that could hurt or offend someone. Instead, if they're going to make jokes, they should make ones that are occasional, meaning they happen sometimes, and neutral. So specifically what we're talking about here, the person should not be focused on making jokes. They're not here to do a comedy special. They're here to help you and support you. And sometimes that looks like, joking around a little bit to lighten the mood. But those jokes should never be the focus of your support, and they shouldn't be something that ever hurts you. And if you get hurt by a joke, you deserve to stand up for that and get that situation fixed. Another thing that they should not be doing is talking about you in front of you. So sometimes there are certain situations where you can't be pulled away from what you're doing. And it's just more, I don't want to say easier. I suppose it's just, it's the most appropriate thing to do in that moment is to sort of have a quick conversation with someone else. But this should never be something that's done very often because you deserve to be a part of conversations that are about you because they're centered on you. So obviously you're going to have a say in them most of the time. So if they're doing a lot of talking about you in front of you, you should tell someone because they're not supposed to be doing that. Instead, they should be including you in the conversation. So if they're going to talk to your supervisor or your house manager, something like that, and they're talking about you and you're right there, they should be saying, hey, come in here and, we're going to have this discussion, because really there's nothing that they should be talking about that you shouldn't be included in for the most part. If you want more details about that as well, you can feel free to tell me about it as well. Another thing that they should not be doing is giving their opinions like facts. Sometimes direct support professionals, when they try to advise people or help people, they tend to make it sound like their way of thinking is the only way to go. And that's not acceptable because the whole point is to allow you to do what you want and need to do. So if they're saying something like, this job isn't good for you, or this chore is, something that you shouldn't be doing. Well, they could be wrong, and they are not allowing you to kind of step into that conversation and have that discussion. So instead, they should be talking more about, what do you think? This is what I think. What do you think? Again, including you in that conversation so that you can be a part of your own care. The last thing is to make it about their feelings. So sometimes I know direct support professionals will try to get people to do things by saying, I'll be sad if you don't do this, or I'll be happy if you do this. That's not appropriate because their feelings aren't supposed to come into the equation. The whole point is, again, to support you in what you need and want to do. So whether or not they are trying to get you to do something, their feelings don't come into play. It's all about your feelings and what you need. So instead, they should be putting you at the forefront and also explaining to you if they need you to, if they're asking you to do something, they should be explaining why you should do it. And then you should be able to make the decision whether or not you're going to participate. One way to think about whether or not they're doing an appropriate job and providing good quality of care is thinking about whether or not you would want this from your doctor. Now, when I give this to people who work in supported employment, what I tend to do is tell them, hey, think about how you're acting and think whether you would want your doctor to act this way. So that tends to put things in perspective for people because they kind of have an idea of the way that a doctor is supposed to act. But I also want to respect that sometimes doctors don't provide a high quality of care for people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities either, So think about this question as another way to sort of go about it. But if it doesn't apply to you, don't feel bad. It simply may not. Unfortunately, people have a lot of different experiences with a lot of different care professionals. And they may not have provided you correct quality of care in the past. So if your doctor isn't being applied or isn't matching up to the standards that I'm discussing, this question may not be as applicable to you. But if you have a good doctor, this may be something that you can use to figure out whether or not your support professional is providing a good amount of care, or a good quality of care, rather. So I'm going to give a couple of examples. And the reason I'm going to give examples is because of the fact that support professionals, because they're human, often have situations that are influenced by their emotions. And I want you guys to have an example of what that can look like in a negative light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share two stories from when I was a support professional, specifically a supported employment support professional, and show how my emotions got in the way of giving good quality of care. If this sounds like anything that you've been a part of, then you may want to go ahead and talk about that with someone so you can kind of unpack that situation and figure out what you should do about it. And specifically, what I'm going to talk about is whether my positive or negative emotions, both of them, have impacted my quality of care in a bad way. Although this specific example isn't about my quality of care, although it does come into it. I'll discuss that in a second. So the reason that I have a picture of two people fighting is because I'm going to tell a story about one of my first experiences as a job coach. Now, I was a job coach in Connecticut. Things were a little bit different than they are in New Jersey, but not too much. I was shadowing my supervisor who was working with a client who had an intellectual and developmental disability. So they're working together and the client's starting to get frustrated. And he gets so frustrated to the point where he ends up swearing at my boss. And my boss, feeling hurt and angry, swore back at the client. Now, this is a situation that should never have happened. Because of the fact that my boss was in a position of power and she's supporting the client, meaning that she's in a situation where she needs to help take care of him and get him to where he needs to be, she should never be swearing at that person or doing anything that could potentially hurt him in any way. Now, even though he swore at her, that's a behavior that's unkind, of course, but it's not the same as when someone who supports you swears at you. And the reason for that is because, again, they're supposed to be caring for you in that situation. So this was never something that was going to be appropriate. However, it may be understandable in a certain light. I can understand people thinking, if someone swore at me, I would be really upset and I would want to swear back. And that's understandable. Again, just because you have an emotion, though, doesn't mean that you need to act on that emotion, especially when you have a responsibility. So the people who are supporting you guys have a responsibility to act in a way that protects you, and that does not include swearing. She should have used other methods of calming down, which we'll discuss, and managing those negative emotions so that they didn't end up impacting her quality of care. And I want to mention as well, I was a new employee. I was standing by. What I wish I had done is I wish I had intervened and I had made some kind of comment. In a way, I was providing poor quality of care in that moment because I didn't stand up for the client, even though I should have. Now, again, my feelings are kind of understandable in that situation. I'm new. I don't really know what I'm doing quite yet. I don't want to lose my job. But I was still in a position where I was supposed to help care and support for the client. So I should have been the one to stand up for him when, that kind of thing happened. And once I saw something similar to that happen a couple months later, I did stand up for the client. I do wish I had corrected that mistake in that moment, though. Again, if you ever have a situation like this, tell someone who assists with your care or who you trust so that you can help get that taken care of, because you don't deserve that to happen to you. Now I'm going to tell a story about something that I specifically did, and this is where my positive emotions actually impacted my quality of care in a bad way. So I had a client, and we were pretty close, I'd say. She and I worked really closely because she had a lot of anxiety and a specific type of developmental disability that I was very familiar with, so we got on pretty well. And it took about a year or two, but she ended up trusting me really closely. Even though she wasn't really comfortable with a lot of people, she was comfortable with me, and I was really proud of that. And I was really happy to be able to support her through all that she had gone through. And eventually, the sort of culmination of this, the end result was that she got a job, and I was super happy, super proud of her. And so at this point, my brain is impacted by my positive feelings for her. And I'll explain how that ended up happening in this situation. She starts this new job and she's stocking shelves at a warehouse. And I start to notice that as she stacks shelves and she reaches up, her shirts are too short. And so her shirt can be pulled up and I can see her underwear. Now, what I should have done immediately is say, hey, I can see your underwear when you do that. Next time, can you wear a longer shirt? Let's, tie a sweatshirt around your waist, that kind of thing. But I didn't, and I'm ashamed to admit that. I unfortunately paused because I cared about her to the point where I didn't want her to feel bad. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, and I knew it would hurt her feelings, and I knew it would make her nervous. So I waited. But that's completely inappropriate. Even though it makes sense why I would do that, my job is to support her. And if her clothes aren't performing to the dress code, or they're doing something inappropriate or something that could embarrass her, it's my job to tell her. So what I should have done in that instance is I should have told her immediately, no matter how, nervous or worried that I would be upsetting her, that I might feel. Because my emotions aren't supposed to come into this. It's not about how I feel. It's about giving the best care possible to the people that I support. So had I done this, nowadays, I know that I would have gone back, and even though it would have been difficult, I would have let her know what was happening so that I knew that I was providing her the support that she deserved, because I was not in that moment. Job coaching and other types of not supported employment, but other types of direct support can be difficult because of the fact that you're in very human situations where emotions happen often. And if you don't have a really good control over your emotions, whether they're negative, like you saw in the argument example, or positive, like you saw in the embarrassment example, they can still impact the kind of care that they give. So they need to have a very good control over their emotions, even though it's difficult. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean that they're excused if there's a problem. They still should be giving you the quality of care that you deserve. And that's at that extremely high levels that we're trying to give. So again, if you have anything similar to the embarrassment example, tell somebody so that they can go ahead and help you fix that situation. Make sure it doesn't happen again. So some things that they can do if they're having an emotional issue is they can work on processing them using some of the strategies that I have here. Cool thing about these strategies is that they'll also work for you guys if you ever have any negative emotions that you need to process in the moment. So some things that they can try doing are some deep breaths, breathing in as far as you can go, making sure your lungs are all expanded, really stick it out, kind of fill up as much as you can, hold it for a couple of seconds, and then breathe out until you can't breathe out anymore. Just complete whoosh of air. Doing that a couple of times can really help a person calm down in an emotionally charged situation, especially because it helps get oxygen to the brain. And the brain needs a lot of oxygen in order to be able to think clearly and react appropriately to situations. Deep breathing is not going to fix the problem, nor are a lot of these strategies going to fix the problem. The problem can still be there. However, you have the best chance of solving the problem when you're calmed down. And it's the same thing for your support professionals. If they're calmed down, they have the best chance of supporting you in the way that you deserve. Another thing that you can do, or that they can do as well, is stretching, especially abdominal muscles. We carry a lot of stress in our abdominal muscles, meaning the ones, in our stomach or in our fronts. So if you stretch up like this, that can kind of help stretch out the muscles in this area. And that can help relieve some of that tension. Another thing that you can do is, or that they can do specifically, is they can take a quick break. So, they can use the equivalent of a bathroom break, 5 minutes or so, to have a quick distraction or to call somebody and let them know, hey, I'm having a hard time. Let me talk about this real quick, until they get to a point where they can handle the situation and go back. It shouldn't be very long unless it's an emergency of some kind, in which, it might be better to let them take a little bit longer. And then once their shift is over, they should perform some self-care. All jobs have stressors, and this job is no exception. So I recommend a little bit of self-care, whatever people like to do at the end of any job or anything that's difficult, whether it's a doctor's appointment, going to the store, lots of different things can benefit from taking some time afterwards to de-stress, and participate in hobbies and other things that can help people sort of calm down and get rid of some of those feelings. Another thing that you can do is you can do some meditations. So these are really cool, especially because they allow your brain to sort of shut off for a minute and focus on only what the person is saying, if it's a guided meditation, in order to get to a point where you can calm down more effectively. So I'm going to play the first couple minutes of a meditation. Well, actually, I believe this meditation is only 3 minutes long. However, I'm going to say before I play this video that meditations don't work well for everybody. There are some people who really love it and some people who it makes them uncomfortable. So if you're watching this webinar or if you're here today and you're not a fan of meditations, whether you've tried them before, you're just not feeling it today or whatever it is, I invite you to take a quick break, go walk around a little bit, have a snack or whatever it is that helps you kind of get to a point that a meditation is supposed to help you with. And if you're watching this recorded, feel free to skip ahead.
Close your eyes and find a comfortable position. During this brief meditation, I'll ask you to pay attention to what's happening inside your body right now. You'll find that you don't have to change anything. Just observe. Direct your attention towards your stream of thoughts. What thoughts are traveling through your mind right now? Can you give them a name? Notice your feelings. What feelings are present in your body in this moment? Maybe sadness, curiosity, anger. If you can, try to give them a name. Try to notice if there are other kinds of sensations present in your body right now, like tingling, tension, vibrations. Just observe them and let them be. Now shift your focus and pay close attention to your breath. Notice how it feels to breathe in and breathe out. Try to give your breath your undivided attention for a few seconds. Lastly, try to expand your focus and take in the whole body. Notice that you're sitting here with your whole body. You become aware of your posture, your facial expression, your feelings and other sensations. Hold them in awareness, just as they are. Notice that you don't have to struggle to change anything. It's okay to let them be just as they are right now. When you feel ready, open your eyes and return to your session.
Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And if you stepped away from the meditation, again, that's perfectly fine, and I welcome you back. Again, my name is Samantha Goldfarb, just so you know specifically who's speaking. So that meditation is only 3 minutes long, 3 minutes and 28 seconds, and it's by a YouTube channel called Flow, which does a lot of similar meditations. If someone who is supporting you needs a 5-minute bathroom break, they can do this very easily. So this is something that's available to them, and something that's available to you as well if you ever find that it's useful. If you want any more details about this as well, please again feel free to contact me. My information is going to be at the end of the slides. So one of the reasons that it's really important to quality of care that they they appear specifically calm and are able to help is because of the impact that someone who's acting in a certain emotional way can have on other people. So I have a little meme on here. I like to add something a little silly into my presentations if I can. And it has a very common situation that a lot of people go through when they're doing homework as a kid. So it has a kid who is coloring and she's quite upset. And it says, "Dad, if I have 10 apples and you take away 4, how many apples are left?" The person says, "Me, 4." And then Dad says, repeats the question but shouting. And then the crying girl says, "Me, I don't know, zebra." And the reason that that's there is because, again, this is a common situation that happens often where somebody gets frustrated that someone doesn't know the answer to a homework problem, or another issue. And so they put that frustration out into the world. They get frustrated, they start shouting, and then it only ends up with everyone who is around them being upset, including you. So if you went to them for help and then they ended up being frustrated or angry, the result is that you're frustrated and angry too, or you might be feeling, injured on the inside. And especially, it's not fair that you went to them for help and you only came away feeling more upset. That's not something, not a situation that should ever be happening in support. So if you ever have a situation where someone who's supporting you is making you feel like this, there's a problem and you should tell someone. So their emotional appearance, just to recap, can affect you. People tend to feel other people's emotions. That's a common experience that people have. Not everybody does, but a lot of times people get affected by other people's emotions and they start feeling the same way. But they can make this a good or bad thing. So if they focused on having an emotional appearance, the emotions that they're putting out into the world, that they're calm, that they're happy, that they're confident, then you're more likely to feel calm and happy and confident. But if they're acting frustrated or angry, then you're more likely to feel frustrated or angry. Another thing too, which, as you may or may not know, people with lots of different types of disabilities are significantly more likely to experience abuse in their lifetime, meaning people who are supposed to take care of them or be part of their lives doing things that hurt them. And people specifically with intellectual developmental disabilities have that at a much higher likelihood. It's much more likely that that could happen. And it's quite likely that it's happened to anyone who's on the call at the moment. What that means when it comes to supporters' emotional appearance is that if they're acting angry or frustrated, then you're going to be more sensitive to that. So you're more likely to have your emotions change in a bad way because of what they're feeling. It also means that you may feel less comfortable with sharing how you're feeling, because if you get scared or upset or angry because of the feelings that they're feeling, you have less room in your brain and in your heart for sharing it in a calmer manner, if that makes sense. So in essence, if they're going to be more upset, it's going to be less likely that you're going to feel comfortable telling them about how their upset is making you upset. And it also means that if they make mistakes, then you're more likely to still get hurt by them. Instead of just letting it roll off your back, people who have experienced abuse, it might stick with them for a long period of time. And it may be the same for you. So those are kind of the risks of what happens if they don't maintain a calm outlook, a happy outlook, a confident outlook, and instead focus on negative feelings like anger or frustration. If you're getting this a lot and the way that they're appearing emotionally is hurting you or making you feel uncomfortable in any way, tell someone so they can help you get the situation resolved. Another thing that I'll see, and I'll go over this kind of briefly because this applies a little bit more specifically to the support professionals themselves. But sometimes what happens in the mind of a support professional is they're looking at a client and they'll be thinking of like a certain way that's not helpful when it comes to approaching the client's issues. So one thing that they may end up thinking is something like, "Oh, that client is really annoying." I don't know if you've experienced this where you've had somebody who is supposed to be helping you clearly sees you as annoying. It hurts on the inside. I know I've experienced that, and you may have too. If they're feeling like that, what they really should try to be thinking is, I'm feeling really annoyed, because in essence, it's really not your fault that they're annoyed. You only have so much control over anybody's emotions, and your behaviors aren't supposed to, impact them significantly in that way. Or rather, if they are impacted, they're supposed to be they're supposed to handle that themselves. So they shouldn't be blaming you for that. Instead, they should be acknowledging that feeling and figuring out how to take care of it. Again, instead of blaming you for, making them feel a certain way. Another thing that you may, some people may have even heard this is, you're doing this on purpose, or thinking that you're doing this on purpose. In reality, if they're thinking this way, what they should be thinking is, why might the person who I'm supporting be doing this? They should never, again, just be blaming you and then leave it at that. What they should be doing is thinking about different ways to help you through whatever you're struggling with in the moment. Sometimes people will say things like, oh, you're not even trying, or they think that because you're not succeeding at the level that you were, that you've given up for the day. And quite often this is not true. It's very unlikely that people will give up when they're trying to do tasks like this. A lot of other times it's about other situations, like being emotionally exhausted or physically exhausted, or having people who aren't providing you a good quality of care. That can make it look like you're not trying if you don't end up being motivated in that same way. If they're thinking about that, what they should be thinking of is, what could be stopping you? So essentially, what's getting in your way to helping you, what's getting in your way to helping you get to the place where you need to be, rather than just, oh, well, it's their fault. If you ever hear just, it's their fault, and then they stop, tell someone, because that's not appropriate for them. Another thing is, they're just doing this for attention. I know a lot of clients have heard this before. Back when I used to work in specific, like I used to work in in day-habilitation and residential, I used to hear, they're doing this for attention quite frequently, and that's really not fair. Even if you are doing this for attention is a need. Everybody needs attention at some level, and if you're just doing something for attention, what it probably means is that you need help with something. Even if it's not the thing that you're struggling with, or you appear to struggle with on the surface, you're struggling with something else. Don't let anyone tell you that you're just doing something for attention. That's completely inappropriate. Instead, they should be thinking about what your behavior is telling them that you need. They should always be thinking about your needs first. They should never be in a situation, or they should never put themselves in a situation where they seem to be giving up on you, in essence. They should always be thinking about the best way to help you through a situation, rather than just stopping because there is a situation. Also, I recommend a couple of different perspectives that they should be keeping in mind when supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or really anybody, quite frankly. One of the things that I tell people is really important is asking why. If they don't ask you why you're doing something, something's probably not quite right in the way that they're doing things, because they don't know everything about you. And, just as they're not mind readers, they won't be able to find out why something is happening unless you've helped them figure out how to communicate that. But unless you're able to go up and tell them, exactly what's going on, and not everyone's going to be able or willing in the moment to do that, they should be asking you. They shouldn't just be assuming that something is happening for just some reason that they've decided. That communication is really important, and is really a significant part of good quality of care. So some things that I like to tell people to consider, and that they should be considering for you when they're supporting you. Could you be having trauma that's affecting your choices? So if you've had something bad happen to you in your life that's changed the way you kind of see the world, a lot of times this will impact your behavior more than you realize. And what that can end up looking like is, you may avoid certain places or certain tasks, or you may do things a certain way so that you think you can stop that bad thing from happening again. But on the outside, if they don't know that something bad has happened that's causing you to think like that, they may just think you're being difficult. And that's not fair. They should not be thinking that. They should be thinking, what could be the reason behind this? And trauma could be one of those reasons. Another one is a mental health issue. So trauma is similar to a mental health issue. But if you're experiencing something like depression, anxiety, obsessive thoughts, meaning you can't get thoughts to stop in your head, you can't kind of get your brain to be quiet, especially about a certain thing, or other things where your brain is getting in the way of you doing what you want, that can make it look like or to a support professional, it can make it look like you're not trying, or you're just not doing what they say because you feel like it. They shouldn't be assuming that you're not trying or you're not doing what they say because you feel like it. They should be thinking, maybe there's a mental health issue at play potentially, and consider that as an option, and then have a discussion with you about if that could be the case. Another thing is life disturbances. Lots of things can cause the problems that support professionals come up with. So, for example, if you're moving, or if grandma's sick, or if there's your pet's having problems, these things can change the way that you act. And support professionals need to be thinking about this so that they can be more compassionate and help you specifically through whatever's going on. And sometimes you may have a medical problem that may show up as as you not wanting to do what someone is telling you to do. And that, your supporters should be thinking about that as well. So just to sum things up, if your support person has done any of these things, that does not necessarily mean that they're bad or bad at their job, although, keep that as an option, and your feelings are valid. So, if they're doing a lot of these things, you may have to have more conversations. But in essence, just because they've done some of these things doesn't necessarily mean that it's over. There's two types of thought that can kind of exist at the same time in this instance. For example, if they're struggling a lot with their feelings and it's causing them to behave inappropriately, those feelings matter and they make sense and they're real, but they're still not allowed to affect their care. So they have the responsibility to address those feelings however they can, using some of the stress management techniques that I mentioned before, talking about it with other people, and just in general, making sure that they're taking care of themselves that way. We also tend to believe, just like we want to believe with everybody, that they're doing their best. So what that also means, however, just because something is their best at one point, it doesn't mean that's their best forever. People grow and change, especially when they get new information. So once they've learned now, whether they take this training or whether they do other research, once they learn that there's other better ways to provide quality of care, then they have the responsibility to go ahead and approach those, put them into practice, and then they can do better, and then they can improve that. I will also say, however, if you've ever been wronged by someone who has supposed to support you, and you feel hurt and you don't want them to support you anymore, that's perfectly okay, whether or not they change, or whether or not they say that they'll change. You have the right to get the support that you need. And if that means not getting it from a specific person, you should tell someone about that so that they can help make that happen. Because the whole point of everything about this is making sure that you're comfortable and you get what you need. So at this point, I appreciate you attending and you listening to me. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them at this point. I haven't seen anything specifically in the chat. Frankie or Bianca, have you seen any questions that should be directed to me?
Nothing's come to me.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I haven't received anything so far.
Then maybe I'm thinking we'll give it, a minute or two, see if anybody has any questions that come to mind, whether they're through the chat or vocally or in another way. And while we're waiting there, I also want you to know that if you don't want to chat, through Zoom, you can contact me using any of the contact information that's here on the slides. And that contact information should also be provided after the training, with the other materials.